Welcome to the Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I'm Hannah Quinn Mulligan, news correspondent with the Irish Farmers Journal. Coming up on the show this week, forestry company Greenbelt responds to farmers' concerns over the growing amount of land going into forestry plantations.
Where we come into the parts of Leitrim to acquire forestry land, I am adamant that we do not cause anything that remotely resembles rural depopulation. We come into a scenario where somebody has already decided to sell.
And we talk to Minister of State Andrew Doyle at the first CAP consultation meeting in Carlow this week.
We'd have a couple of key points is that we get to control our national envelope, that we make simplification simple, that subsidiarity gives us targets as opposed to compliance.
First up, forestry has been a contentious issue in Leitrim for some time now. Concerns have been raised about non-farming investors buying large swathes of land in the county. News correspondent Thomas Hubert met with John O'Reilly, chief executive of forestry company Greenbelt, who responded to farmers' concerns.
I would argue that, the first point is that land acquisition for forestry investment does take place in Leitrim. I would also like to point out that for every farm that somebody wants to acquire in Leitrim, there's a person from Leitrim selling that farm, and I would argue that those individuals are quite entitled to achieve the best price they can for their land unit. We are as a company involved in land acquisition in Leitrim, and I would point out that we do negotiate with all local landowners the swapping or the resale back of elements of forestry land that we are acquiring in certain areas. This happens quite frequently. We will sit down and negotiate with the locals to sell them back or to swap with them better fields wherever we are acquiring a forest block. So I would contend that landowners in Leitrim are entitled to sell. They are entitled to receive the best price they can for their land, and that we as a company do actively get involved in selling marginal or better bits of marginal farms back to local farmers. So we try and take a very fair approach to it. Leitrim does have some marginal land, so that sort of land does suit forestry investment. There's no doubt about that. Where we come into the parts of Leitrim to acquire forestry land, I am adamant that we do not cause anything that remotely resembles rural depopulation. We come into a scenario where somebody has already decided to sell. Somebody quite frequently wants to sell only a percentage of their holding. They're trying to achieve the best price they can for that, and the reasons they are selling are nothing in the wide earthly world to do with rural depopulation. They're quite frequently selling for a number of reasons, amongst clearing bank debt, trying to get some funds together to send kids to college, trying to maybe ameliorate or improve the piece of ground that they're keeping. Some sell and actually want to move out of the rural economy but move into the local town where they feel safer. Generally happens with elderly people, be they living alone or be they living as an elderly couple. But I have never walked into a scenario where the acquisition of a piece of ground for forestry has led to what people like to call rural depopulation. If anything, I find that the revenue that goes into the local economy from the point of view of selling a piece of their ground helps maintain rural populations, because it brings a bit of, revenue or income into the rural economy.
Now, we're here in County Cavan. I was looking at the statistics from the Department of Agriculture, and it's nearly half and half between the category of farmers and non-farmers who plant forestry in this county. And we've seen more people in this non-farmer category acquiring land for this purpose. Is it really a case of farmers really being no longer attracted to this and more institutional, faceless investors coming in?
It's very important to clarify exactly what a non-farmer is. Sometimes groups of people get put into boxes just because that's what the box is christened. The box is christened non-farmers. Non-farmers are people who historically did not qualify for the higher farmer rate of forestry premium based on the qualification criterion that were laid down by the Department of Agriculture some number of years ago. You had to have an active herd number, you had to be an active beneficiary of a payment from the Department of Agriculture, or you had to receive at least 25% of your income from agriculture in the year of planting or in one of the 3 years prior to that. There's a vast proportion of the rural economy, rural landowners, who are ruled out from being capable of receiving the farmer rate of premium, even though one would class them as local farmers. Two categories I'll highlight. One was those that were involved in the farm retirement scheme, a legitimate farmer in the rural economy, not capable of receiving the higher rate of forestry premium. If he plants now, he's classed as a non-farmer. Is he a non-farmer? I don't think so. The other category that falls into the non-farmer catchment are people who are letting their land for a substantial period of time. Elderly couples, quite frequently we would find widows who might be farming a piece of ground, don't tend to actively farm it but tend to rent it or lease it or let it for a long period of time. Those individuals were not actively farming their land. They weren't in receipt of 25% of their income from active agriculture. They weren't receiving, they probably didn't have an active herd number. And they again were a catchment of rural dwellers and landowners and farmers, I would call them, who weren't entitled to receive the higher rate of forestry premium or the farmer rate of forestry premium under the old rules and regulations. Therefore, they all slot into this new category of non-farmer, and in my opinion, they make the non-farmer category look like it is people coming out of Dublin or institutional investors coming out to acquire land from abroad, and that's actually not what's happening at all. What's happening is that there's a broader range of people in the rural community now capable of qualifying for the higher rate of forestry premium. That's not to say that an element of the non-farmer group is not an institutional investor or to acquire marginal land for forestry. That is happening, but it is a much less significant percentage of that non-farmer category than one is led to believe. The bulk of non-farmers are those that did not qualify under the old terms and conditions but now do, and the bulk of them are living in the rural economy and are basically taking premium into that rural economy.
Finally, we've heard a lot of concerns about the level of employment in rural areas and the fact that traditional farming would give a lot of jobs to people between the farmer themselves, but also their contractors, their vets, their local co-op store, and all those that gravitate around them. Is there really any jobs available from a plantation of trees that are going to grow essentially by themselves for many years?
The answer to that is yes. The key to it is to have a forestry cycle, of plantations. In other words, there are plantations that are 1, 2, 4, 20, 25, 30 years old. And as a county, I would reference Wicklow, where you have a much longer track record of forest establishment and where people are much more heavily involved in employment in the forestry sector. The early stage of a forest cycle is to have people engaged in establishing and managing that forest. But as you move on to year 14, 15, you get a lot of local contractors who are involved in road establishment, road construction, a lot of local contractors who are involved in timber harvesting, and then a massive quantum of people who are involved in timber haulage and adding value to timber locally. Again, if you go to a county where the forest estate is more mature, maybe more advanced or more knitted into the rural economy for a longer period of time, again like Wicklow, you will find a lot of local industry, a lot of local processing, and a lot of people who are involved in the processing and managing and harvesting of timber. So whilst forests might not create a lot of employment when a forest is 10, 11, 12 years old, the key to it is to get a cycle of forests, to get a multi-age spread across the forest so that you have people actively engaged in forest establishment and then actively engaged in harvesting, actively engaged in road construction and actively engaged in adding value to the material that's coming out of those woods. If we reference the county that is shall we say, being highlighted in the journal at this point in time, and we reference Leitrim, even at this point in time the largest employer in Leitrim is the forestry sector. The largest rate payer to Leitrim is the forestry sector. So the forestry sector, whilst it is planting land in Leitrim, we're not creating a scenario where we're creating a wilderness of jobs. Forestry is a very significant employer in County Leitrim, and it will only grow as that timber gets harvested. The profile of job changes. I admit that the profile of job does change. You're involved in doing something different, but forestry, as timber movements increase, will create a lot of employment.
We hope that you're enjoying this Irish Farmers Journal podcast. Find out more at farmersjournal.ie.
Meanwhile, the Department of Agriculture's Common Agricultural Policy, or CAP, consultations kicked off in Carlow this week. News correspondent Amy Ford spoke to Minister of State Andrew Doyle at the first one.
Well, I think at the outset, this is the first of the 6, Amy, as you said. What we were trying to do was outline the CAP's, the future of food and farming. That's the Commission's communication. That's what it's entitled. Quick outline from 4 speakers from the Department, Teagasc and EPA, and myself and the Assistant Secretary. And then we listened, and I think we got a flavour of where people, you can see the big issue is the budget. The big issue is age profile, and all interlinked, by the way. Environmental asks need money to be paid for if that is what's needed. And the other issue is obviously the big one that the Commission has identified as well is risk management stroke the market supply chain. If we can get it right and use the CAP as part of the remedy to all of those challenges, I think the CAP can be user-friendly. We have to go, as somebody said, the elephant in the room was Brexit. So we have a hole to fill to stand still. And we have to get buy-in from 27 member states, including Ireland, who are bought in, as are others. It's getting that across the board, and what will be the negotiations, what will be asked. But I think that we'd have a couple of key points, is that we get to control our national envelope, that we make simplification simple, that subsidiarity gives us targets as opposed to compliance. And in the way that was highlighted, say, with some of the schemes like the Burren scheme, where you get paid for the target, you're not paid for compliance. And if we can get into that mindset, and there are challenges to the farming community as well, like 90% of the soils aren't at the really right fertility, where a small amount of sensible investment based on soil tests, say lime for instance, can actually improve the soil fertility, reduce the cost of the need for other more expensive fertilisers, improve animal performance from the environmental point of view, and improve profit. Like, these are things that we need to look at as well. And it's to get, I think, certainly people air their opinion very strongly, but at the end of the day we're all on the one side here, and you can get that, even everybody. And I thought in particular the contribution from the Environmental Protection Agency was passionate about the need to be all of us on this together. And we have to, we are on the one page. Agriculture, we said, is a key biggest indigenous industry, interlinked with our other biggest indigenous industry, tourism. So the landscape and the environment are what makes the offering, the tourist package, attractive. So we have to get both right.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast.
This week, a national planning framework meeting took place at the Hodson Bay Hotel in Athlone. A cross-party group of TDs are saying that the NPF, National Planning Framework, focuses on future investment in cities at the cost of rural Ireland. I spoke with John Connolly, a concerned citizen at the meeting, and TDs Alan Kelly for Labour and independent TD Michael Fitzmaurice.
Well, my thoughts is that it's a lot of talk, and I'd love to see some real action happening in the regions where a lot of farming communities have disappeared. A lot of infrastructure isn't there. For example, broadband, really, really bad roads. Well, it's an absolute disgrace, because the backbone of this country and the most number of employees is rural Ireland. And it's a disgrace that it's been forgotten, not only in infrastructure, in every other way. And that's my view, and it's just getting worse.
So we'll have to see what the politicians say next.
Well, we'll see what they come up with, but I'm not hopeful.
Alan Kelly, we're here at Hodson Bay Hotel. It's been a long night, I think we could say. It started at 8 p.m. and it is going on 11:30 now in the evening.
Still haven't eaten.
Still haven't eaten. No, well, hopefully they'll remedy that situation. So there's a lot of talk. What do you think got people going tonight? What do you think they were concerned about?
I think the government met today because they know that they've made a huge mistake. This is the biggest plan they're ever going to launch. And they realise that there's growing opposition against it. And that has now been organised at a political level, and the majority of TDs in Dáil Éireann have problems with their plan. So they had to have an emergency meeting tonight to try and deflect it. The Taoiseach has come out and said it will be substantially changed. I don't believe you can do that overnight or over a couple of weeks, so it's going to take a long time, I think, to change this. And remember, the capital plan is totally interlinked with it. I think their strategy now is to try and dismiss what we're doing and say we're looking for, one for everyone in the audience, something for every part of Ireland, and all of that, which we're not. And they're also now putting forward figures of billions that can be brought into the economy and billions to be spent in infrastructure, just to try and give it as a carrot to stop us from pursuing our objectives. We're not going to be stopped. This is bad for our rural Ireland, it's bad for Dublin, and it doesn't reflect on what everyone needs.
You mentioned there tonight that you were involved at the beginning of the stage, beginning of the planning. I mean, is this what you envisioned it would look like?
No. If I was in government as Minister of the Environment, as it was then, this plan would never have saw the light of day.
You mentioned it's obviously a cross-party group of you all up there, and you have to sit down and come up with some solutions to present to government. I mean, what would be high on your list of agenda there for solutions?
Well, for starters, I think we need a plan that will allow for greater development of infrastructure jobs and social facilities in the greater regional areas. We need to then have a plan that plays to our strengths in regional areas to grow our towns. The idea that you set a population limit of 10,000 for future investment and future jobs is rubbish. You play to the strengths of an area, whether it be tourism, whether it be close to other regional cities, which means that it can provide different types of jobs, whatever it is, whether it's in the agri-industry, whether it's in service industry, whatever it is. And that's what we need to do. The idea that you just set population boundaries is insane. Furthermore, when it comes to rural Ireland, I come from a farm, I come from rural Ireland, I live on the side of a hill overlooking Lough Derg. I know what it is to embrace and love rural areas. We're not taking, this plan is an economic plan. It's not embracing the social requirements of Ireland. 1.5 million people live in rural areas. It doesn't reflect their needs. It thinks that future generations are just going to move into cities. That is not what should happen in our country. We have one advantage. Our country is small. Its scale is manageable. So we need to plan for that to allow people to have choice and also to have better living standards by not all crowding into cities.
TD Michael Smart, we're here at the Hudson Bay Hotel in Athlone, and it's been a busy night. What do you think the plan missed for rural Ireland?
Nearly everything. So there's a big concern about the one-off housing that where they appear to be trying to completely get rid of it. But look at
does it take agriculture into account at all?
The plan wouldn't take agriculture in, but as I said earlier on, you might have heard me, but I believe there's a few, fierce important crossroads that's coming up, and if we turn the wrong way, it could do awful harm. You heard me saying earlier on the CAP 2020, we can have that infrastructure, we can have the good road. The only thing about it is, if they're not making a viable living on the family farm, you're not going to keep them there. That's why there's a few pieces of the overall jigsaw that needs to be put together to make sure that youngsters stay in rural parts of Ireland.
You mentioned there that you all have to sit down and talk about solutions and revisions that you'd like to see made. Are there any that you'd like to see made?
Well, I give a very clear vision of where I wanted to see the plan. I worked on the Atlantic Economic Corridor. You heard it talked about here tonight. But I would be very much in favour of giving, for areas that are struggling, to give tax incentives to them to be either living in it or to set up business in it, because that's, if you dangle a carrot, someone will bite you.
Stay tuned, because still to come we have a trip to the mart for Save Our Sucklers and the winners of the Macra na Firma National Leadership Awards.
Irish food prices are running 20% higher than the EU average. In this week's Irish Farmers Journal, we investigate why consumers are being ripped off. Our analysis reveals that despite food prices being higher than the EU average, farmers are still not getting their fair share, with the top 5 grocery retailers controlling 90% of the market here in Ireland. Plus, Cabinet to consider fair deal asset cap this month, and learn how tractor NCT testing is back on the table inside this week's Irish Farmers Journal, on sale today.
Over the last week, our beef editor Adam Woods visited various marts, recording prices and chatting to farmers about the Save Our Sucklers petition. Now, in between all that, he spoke with farmers in both Mohill Mart in County Leitrim and Carnaross Mart in County Meath about some of the local farm news in the area. In Mohill, Adam spoke with Mart manager Stephen Hannon, where it was the start of the historic Monaghan Day sales.
Yeah, the Monaghan Day sales are going back here since the day of the Fair Green, when there was no mart here and it was held up the back there. It's a traditional day. We don't know whether it was St. Monaghan brought it in or where it came from, but it has been known for the last very long time as Monaghan Days.
And it's a really good name of good quality cattle. So you get extra customers, I take it, to these sales.
Yeah, people come here, repeat customers year after year, and it is for the good Charolais limousines cattle, and it is, the yard is the main yard of good Charolais cattle.
So you do have 500 weanling heifers in the yard today. In terms of trade, what are you looking at?
Trade is very good for forward heifers. Strongish heifers are a great trade. The lighter ones, a little bit harder sold, but all in all, we'd be very happy with the trade, and it has been a very successful day with a good clearance.
The auctioneer at Mohill Mart is PJ Reynolds. PJ gave Adam an insight into the Monaghan Day sales from the auctioneer's chair.
Monaghan Day and Mohill, you have exceptional quality cattle. It has really kept this mart alive because they come in numbers and they're coming in the last, since the mart opened here for the Monaghan Day sales. And people are happy because they get top prices for the top cattle.
So you have a Monaghan Day sale for bullocks, heifers, wheeling bulls, wheeling heifers, so it's split up into sections over a number of weeks.
Yeah, well, Monaghan Day used to be here on the Thursday, the mart used to be on the Thursday here, and then with times changing and night sales, the whole thing had to change because people were working in the daytime and hadn't time to come out in the daytime. So marts were changed then for Wednesdays and Wednesday nights here. So now we have a Wednesday Day sale instead of a Wednesday night sale for the Monaghan Day sales, and then we move the Thursday sales to a Saturday, because people are off Saturdays as well. So farmers gone very part-time. So we need all the people who want on the day of a big sale, and the more people, the more better it looks.
In terms of that northern trade, I suppose it would have had a famous name maybe for northern buyers here on those Monaghan days. That's dropped off, I suppose, in the last couple of years, has it?
Absolutely. One time you wouldn't start a sale until you see the northern, when you hear the northern voices, and then you'd be happy there's 4 or 5 in the town, and then there was going to be extra prices because that the extra change in sterling, and that made people happy because they were getting maybe 100, 150 more than the ordinary sales because they were here, because they could afford to do it, because the exchange was different.
Is there any northern customers out there today?
Unfortunately, there might be northern active, but there's no northern customer.
Meanwhile, on Tuesday night in Carnaross, Adam met Dermot McGee, a suckler farmer from Meath whose wife, in a strange twist of fate, is a vegan, proving love really is blind.
You mentioned your wife's a vegan. I'm sure that makes for interesting conversations around a Sunday lunch. How does that work?
She more likes... I do all the cooking in the house, actually, because Emer has her own business and she's very busy, and I'm always home before her, so, but her father was a dairy farmer as well, so... But this is my fear, everybody there's so much negativity about the handling of cattle. I welcome anybody on earth to visit my farm and see how I operate and see how I care for my cattle. This is something that's been missed.
Do you think farmers are their own worst enemies in terms of communicating that message with the general public? In terms of, I suppose we've vegans on Twitter and we've other people on Twitter, animal welfare will say activists on Twitter as well, but farmers don't tend to communicate the good messages from farming to our and the next generation of consumers will say your 4 or 5 year olds in terms of educating them where the food comes from. Do you think farmers have a role in that in terms of educating that next generation?
Well, I'll tell you my honest opinion on that. And if you actually think about this, it's very, very easy to answer. You go around the ring tonight, how many farmers in there are on Facebook? I'd say maybe 20, 25. Most people in this mart, and in every mart, and I include Ballaghy and stuff that I often go to our King's Court, are in their late 50s, early 60s. Age profile. Young people like me are just disappearing by the day, and the few that are there, nobody really is listening, I feel.
And just beside the bull ring, Adam got chatting to a young suckler farmer, Keane, who has his own solution.
There's this thing going on about when the calves took off, the mothers being killed and all that.
That's not right.
No, it's not.
And we need to educate them people a bit better.
Yeah.
Have you any ideas on how you could do that?
I want to tell you what I think. Bring them to the farm and show them when the cow's going to calve, what do you do? Like how to use the jack and stuff like that. I love going to sales and rooting about and stuff like that, So that's what.
Have your homework done?
No.
So you're going to do that homework when you get back?
I'll try.
Or are you going to?
Tomorrow morning.
Are you going to go into school tomorrow with an excuse to say you were in Carnaross and you didn't?
Well, he's a hard man to get by, so I'll try him. But you're better off doing it.
What age are you?
I'm 11 now. 12 on the 19th of February.
Where do you go to school?
Muff School.
Well, hopefully young Keane got his homework done on time for school in the morning after a late night at the sales ring.
The Irish Farmers Journal Weekly Podcast.
That was Adam Woods chatting to farmers in Mohill Mart and Carnaross Mart. And now, the Macra na Feirme National Leadership Awards took place in the Red Cow Hotel on Tuesday night. 3 out of the 6 finalists came away with an award, sponsored by ABP. News correspondent Pat O'Toole was on hand and he talked to winners Sean Wallace, Jenny Hall and Sarah Condren.
I think it's a huge significance. I was treasurer last year for the county, and I went forward then for leadership then and got through. But it's absolutely perfect. Like it's just a great reward. It's a lot of work, but it's well worth it at the end.
And when you say a lot of work, what do they put you through in the process?
So there's different interview processes. We had a discussion group, and then now we had a presentation, and it was just on a subject, so we had to just talk about and research and everything like that. So it was brilliant.
Sarah, you're working in the Department of Agriculture. You are an ag, but I noticed from the 7 finalists this year, if you go back, say, even 15 years, typically you'd have seen 4 of 7 finalists would have been either directly in farming or working in the agribusiness sector. Is Macra as central and as relevant to farming, and is farming as central and as relevant to Macra as it once was, and how do we keep them close together?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose the Agricultural Affairs Committee is, I suppose, the subcommittee that's concerned with looking after, obviously, the ag policy and Macra's stance on different issues facing young farmers. But yeah, you're right. It's not just for farmers now either. There's an awful lot of obviously social events, public speaking, drama that really, I suppose, doesn't have much to do with farming. It's just a great social outlet for people. So I suppose it's covering all bases, that it's still a voice for agriculture, but it's not just a voice for agriculture.
But rural youth, you're from a rural county, a very rural area, and rural isolation, it's not just an issue for older people, is it? There's a lot of younger people. If you don't have money, it's hard to travel, it's hard to socialise. Does Macra fill in a gap in rural Ireland in that capacity?
I think it definitely does, because even in our own club Ashford, like, we'd offer lifts to everyone that wouldn't be able to drive or anything like that, and we'll collect them and bring them to each meeting or anything like that. So it does bring great the community within itself.
Yeah, and especially for young farmers, like, it can be a bit isolated as well. You mightn't see anyone from one week to the next, so it's something to do with the weekend. You're meeting like-minded people and with people with the same interests and hobbies as yourself.
Sean, congratulations. Tell us a little about yourself and about the process which brought you here.
Yeah, so I'm a member of Dunamore Macronaforma in Musgrave in County Cork. I work as a software engineer down with an electrical engineering company in Little Island. I suppose the process for this actually started back in September 2016, where we all filled out application forms after county officer training. From that, we kind of didn't really think about them until last summer, where we applied for the Leadership Distinction Awards. All the winners of the Gold Awards were put through to a semi-final. 7 came here tonight, and I was lucky enough to be picked in the top 3.
What are you doing in Macra that has seen you elevated to and picked out for an award like this?
I suppose it's not really being able to say no has landed me where I was, really. Yeah, look, there's an organisation like Macra gives you a huge number of opportunities to develop and to improve yourself, and if you're able to say yes to as many of them as possible, Joe, you'll reap the benefits.
What does Macra give back to someone who takes those opportunities and gets in terms of, I mean, in Ireland we have pub culture. Young people, I suppose, have many options with their leisure time. Macra's quite demanding in terms of the time it consumes. You're working by day, so you don't have a spare minute outside of this. Where's the attraction in it?
Look, I suppose it's just the sheer variety of things you can do within Macra. Like, I know with the last week I've been debating, I've been at drama practice, we had the Capers final there in Mallow last Saturday. Like, there's just the sheer variety of it means that there's something in it for everyone. You could be out 7 nights a week and you wouldn't be doing the same thing any night.
Is Macra as closely wedded to farming and young farmers as it was in the past, or has it become more a broad-based youth organisation? What about yourself? Are you involved in farming in any way?
No, like, I grew up on a small beef farm at home, but we're not doing any work on it at the moment. It's probably after broadening its scope a small bit. Like, we're an organisation now for young farmers and rural youth. Now, the agricultural side of it is very important. Like, that's our roots. We can't forget those. But we have broadened out into rural youth, and we have clubs and cities and colleges and that now. So Joe, it has definitely broadened its scope.
With that broad scope, currently there's a a very significant battle across social media and in the general media between vegans and the farming community. At times it's getting quite shrill. Can an organisation like Macra be an advocate for family farm and for the food that's produced from that family farm?
Yeah, I think that it can. Like, Joe, a lot of the arguments that are being put across by one side in particular, they're just completely irrational. They're not based in fact. They're taking everything to the extreme. Whereas Macra, even in our debating competitions and our public speaking competitions, like, you're taught how to get a point across, you're taught how to make a reasonable logical argument, and I think that can only help our side of the argument, I suppose.
So the leadership awards then are recognising those leadership skills that you can then bring into advocacy for rural affairs right through every strata of society.
Yes, that's right. I mean, like, you can see even from some of the past winners of this award and some past leaders within Macra, you have Joe Healy and some other members in the IFA. I know there are plenty of other organisations, particularly down at parish level, there's community councils, GA clubs, where a lot of the people running those organisations have been past members of Macra. So I think it's widespread throughout Irish society.
Sean, thanks very much.
Thanks a million, Pat.
You're listening to the Irish Farmers Journal podcast.
And that's it from this week. Thanks for listening, and remember, you can follow our app, Facebook and Twitter page, and even our Snapchat profile to keep up to date with all the latest farm news. If you're feeling traditional, you can even buy a newspaper. The sound engineer was Ferdia Mooney, and I'm Hannah Quinn Mulligan.
The Irish Farmers Journal podcast, online at farmersjournal.ie and on iTunes every Thursday.